Welcome to Wimborne Minster. This is the choristry where all the little choristers learn to do their singing before we release them to the public at the weekend. But this is the door to Wimborne Minster's famed chained library. It's 26 steps, so be careful how you go because it was built in the early 1320s. Please follow me. And here we are in the chained library of Wimborne Minster. Good afternoon, I'm Mike. I'm one of the senior librarians here at Wimborne Minster's chained library, one of only 5 chained libraries left now in the country that are open to the public and researchers and academics alike. We've been here as an entity and a library since 1685. And we're still used now by visitors and academics who want to come and look at this wonderful collection. We have about 460 books on display, half of those in chains, and the majority of them are pre-1700. In fact, our oldest book is a handwritten manuscript document, which we'll show you later, that dates from the same year Geoffrey Chaucer was born. If we look at our major collections, we've got this collection just on my right here. These were donated by an ex-presbyter at this minster, a local chap to Wimborne by the name of Dr. William Stone. He donated 90 books to this minster and the library. They're all in Greek, Hebrew and Latin, so readily acceptable to all of us. But they are what's known as the fathers and commentators of the church. They are the great Eastern, Western Orthodox saints and thinkers, and then people like Erasmus who commentated on them. In fact, the first 5 books on the top shelf here are all by Erasmus on the writings and workings and life of St. Augustine of Hippo. Our second major donor Roger Gillingham, another local chapter Wimborne, donated these 90 books, and they're all more of a secular nature as opposed to religious aspects. So it's things like gardening, cookery, history, geography, the oddities of the Royal Society, various things that people can come and look at. We've even got probably the first book ever written in English on health and safety, and that is a book by Stephen Primat, which is just there, and he was the lawyer involved in rebuilding London after the Great Fire of London. And that book laid out how to build houses safely, successfully in London by having streets further apart with the houses, putting gutters and drains in, which we think is common now, it was revolutionary then, and having shorter streets and not having connected roof spaces so fire couldn't rapidly go through them. We took that as common sense now. As I say, then it was revolutionary. But we've also got a book by the pirate botanist, who was a privateer during the reign of the Stuarts, but he was also mad on gardening and flowers. But he showed us how to actually grow vines in this country. My favourite book, and I'm sorry to mention this one, is this one here, which is The Complete Works of Machiavelli. And as I always like to say, you've got God over that side and you've got the devil there. Machiavelli has written several books. Two of the major ones are in that volume there, along with 11 chapters in all. And that is The Prince and the Art of War. In The Prince, which I had to study at university, where he lays out to the children of the Medicis how to rule the city-states. And one of his most chilling phrases, for a prince, it is far better to be feared than loved. And I think there's some of the lessons that we can look at modern politics now, and you can relate straight back to Machiavelli. But we're not all books on politics like that as well. Many of the books there, such as local history books, we've got history books of Dorset, which are absolutely beautifully illustrated, showing all the different towns and villages, all of Dorset. But we've got other histories as well, such as the Council of Trent, which was inaugurated by the Pope to go against Martin Luther's reforms. So that is a very important piece of history involved in that one. But our major books are always on display in this cabinet here. And amongst those, for anyone whose handwriting is as atrocious as mine, is this one here. And that's known in Latin as the Regimen Animarum, or the Guiding of Souls. And it is handwritten on vellum, 80 pages of double pages of vellum, which equates to about 46 animals, goat skin. And in that, it is handwritten by 3 different scribes, and their handwriting is quite distinctive. And there's only 2 other copies of that book that we know of in that state. And the one's in the Bodleian and the other's in the British Library, and they've all been handwritten by 3 different scribes, so they're unique within a group. But the first section of this book lays out the laws of the Catholic Church in Rome, and it's also got aspects of the Charter of the Forest and the Magna Carta. So it is almost a written constitution from the same year that Geoffrey Chaucer was born. Absolutely incredible piece. Above that we have our oldest printed book. This is from 1495, or 10 years after the Battle of Bosworth, and about 40 years since Johannes Gutenberg started mass-produced Bibles, and about 18 years after William Caxton brought the printing press to London from Holland. And as you can see, it's just black and white, there's no secondary or tertiary colours, and the capitals have all been left blank. So if you could afford to have the book printed and then bound, you may be able to afford to have it annotated as well. But the scribes who annotated those used to charge almost as much to print and bind just to do that one work. So you'd have to be very well heeled to get away with that. From that piece of early printing, we move on to probably one of the finest pieces of printing we have in this library. This is the London, Walton or Polyglot Bible. It is the whole Bible in 6 volumes in the 9 classic languages of the biblical era. So there's Greek, Hebrew and Latin, plus Chaldean, Sumerian and all of the different Arabic dialects of 2,000 years ago, some which are defunct now. But I think the printer's art is really to the fore in this book, because all major printing houses could print in their own vernacular, then the three classics of Greek, Hebrew and Latin. The other 6 languages, all the characters had to be handmade, carved out of wood, cast into lead and then filed down to that particular set. And this is what's known as woodblock printing, so it was all blocked and typeset in there. It took 5 years to print each set of volumes. And I just think when you look at it now, the quality of that print is just paramount. It's absolutely wonderful. And we've had academics come in here, and one of them, I always remember, referred to this book as the Rosetta Stone of Bibles, because you've got an Arab dialect, then you've got the Latin equivalent of it. So if you could speak Latin, you could translate into Sumerian or Chaldean. Absolutely amazing book. One of our oddities, should we say, is this one here, which is our smallest book in the library. This is the whole of the New Testament in miniature. It was designed by Glaswegian printers called Bryce and Sons, but Oxford University Press were developing a method of miniature printing at the time, so they combined with them to form the whole of the New Testament in that tiny volume. Bryce and Sons used to make things for Queen Victoria's children's dolls' houses as well, which is why they're all in miniature. But it's quite an odyssey. It always gets people looking, thinking, hey, is that really the whole New Testament? Yes, it is. If we move on to this cabinet here, we call this our Tudor cabinet, although this one is more Stuart than Tudor. We have there one of our books that is hand bound by the royal binder and printer to the court of Henry VIII, a chap called Jan Rains, who was from the Low Countries. And it is the same binding that was used for the book that Henry VIII sent to the Pope, for which he got the title Defender of the Faith for. And as you can see, if you look closely, you can see the royal coat of arms, plus the Tudor rose, plus the pomegranate, which was the emblem of Catherine of Aragon. Now, this book was destined for Catherine's library, but because it's a work of Protestant nature, she without doubt refused it. But somehow it found its way back here, because a year after that book was printed and bound, Henry decided to change his wife in for a newer model. So anything that had a pomegranate on there, whether it was stonework, wood carvings, tapestries, book bindings, were all ripped off and replaced with a falcon, which was the family emblem of Anne Boleyn. Unfortunately for her, 4.5 years later, he repeated the process. So that is really an oddity to end up back here. We'd hope to think it was one of the ladies in waiting who secreted it back to her family in Dorset. The one next to it has also got a Tudor aspect to it. This is the Paraphrases by Erasmus. Erasmus was a priest, but he did want reform of the Catholic Church, but not as far reformed as his old school friend Martin Luther, who, as we know, completely changed the religious aspect of Europe. Erasmus became an itinerant priest and diplomat, visited England on several occasions. In fact, he taught the 3 children of Henry VIII, Mary, Elizabeth and Edward, to such an extent that when Edward ascended the throne after the death of Henry VIII, he made every church in England buy an English version of his paraphrases of the Gospels. However, he also passed on about 5 years later, and Mary, his sister, who was very Catholic, demanded every church burn their copy. We unfortunately lost our English one, but we've still got the Latin one. We're hoping one of these days we'll find a nook and a cranny somewhere and out will pop Erasmus, but we live in hope. Just above it is the wax seal of Elizabeth I. The actual document itself is under hermetically sealed conditions in Dorchester archives, but her document and that seal there is to reinforce the grammar school that started by her great-grandmother, Margaret Beaufort, in Wimborne in 1497. And her proviso was that the school would henceforth be known, and it still is, as the Queen Elizabeth Free Grammar School of Wimborne Minster. Now, we've got another charter, which is just to the rear, And that charter there is by Charles I in 1639. Now, unlike the Elizabethan charter, Charles charged the town of Wimborne £1,200 for that piece of paper, which was a considerable amount of money. And what it does is reinforce the Elizabethan charter. But the people of Wimborne couldn't afford that money at the time. But the ruling family of Wimborne, the Hannams, actually paid the money to Charles. Hopefully they got something out of it as well. But the people of Wimborne didn't like being beholden. And so it took them 4 years, but they gathered all the money together and paid the Hannams back, which I think is quite a remarkable story. And that is just some of the aspects of the books we have on display in this. And we still have visiting academics and researchers coming to use this as the library for which it was intended nearly 400 years ago.
Hi, I'm Jane, and along with Mike, my husband, I've been involved as a volunteer here in the Jayne Library for the past 7 years. My favourite book in the library is The Anatomy of Melancholy by Robert Burton. It was first published in 1621, and it's considered to be the first book in the English language on the subject of mental health, melancholy equating to depression. Our copy here is a 5th edition from 1638. Now, in this book, Robert Burton talks about the causes of melancholy, and then he offers some suggestions for alleviating melancholy or depression. And I think why I like this book so much is it conveys to me that the human condition hasn't changed really in 400 years. Robert Burton suggests that what you should do to combat melancholy is to spend time with friends, laughing, singing, go for country walks, keep busy. And these are all the things that the medical profession today are telling us that we should do to maintain a good state of mental health. In the book as well, it has a section on what it calls the melancholy of religion. And that set me thinking about what it must have been like to be an ordinary person back in the 17th century, where the country had been through such a revolution of religious thinking that you almost wouldn't know what you were meant to think. So we'd gone, obviously we were a Catholic nation to begin with, then we had Henry VIII and the Protestant reforms, followed by his son Edward, who was an even more devout Protestant, switch over to his sister Mary, and we reverted back to Catholicism. And all of this would have filtered down into ordinary everyday life, where the church was much more important, played a much bigger role in society than today. And people would have been very confused about religion, and so I completely get why he includes a section on the melancholy of religion. Welcome to Wimborne Minster. The church was founded in 705 by a lady called Cuthberga, who is our saint now, our patron saint. Cuthberga was the sister of King Ina of Wessex, and he allowed her all the lands surrounding this here, and she founded a double convent and monastery, and she was the abbess of both the convent and monastery. We have a wonderful thread of education running through the minster here, started off from the monastery and convent. And I'm standing by the tomb of John and Margaret Beaufort, who were the parents of Margaret Beaufort, the mother of Henry VII, so the founder of the Tudor dynasty. Margaret's parents lived near here for a while, and this is where she chose to have their tomb built. And she also paid for a priest to say prayers for their souls for perpetuity. And that priest was required to teach grammar to anyone who wanted to come and learn free of charge. So this is the founder of Wimborne Grammar School in 1497. We'll be stepping forward in time to continuing that thread, because we have the famed chained library of Wimborne Minster to see, and that was founded in 1686. Both of the key donors of the library, William Stone and Roger Gillingham, both went to the grammar school founded by Margaret Beaufort, and they went on to make wonderful donations to the Minster, and their books formed the basis of the chained library. Thank you very much, and enjoy the library.